Ohayo gozaimasu. As we say when we are beginning whatever work we have at whatever time we have, that's a Japanese saying. And Sumie Hasegawa, the illustrator of Botanical Shakespeare, right there, and that's me, is Japanese. And that's why the illustrations have such an elegance and simplicity and grace to them. So, hello everyone, and I was going to try. I mentioned this in a show quite some time ago, but I was thinking, everybody says, hi everybody, what are you doing? And I thought we need a special name because and I came up with the Wildings. And the reason is we're using wild plants, and the reason that I talk about nature's pharmacy and grounding in wisdom, which I believe Shakespeare is, because it's so loaded with, Greek and Roman philosophy and, astronomy and medical knowledge and legal stuff. And I mean, it's just chock full. And I often say it's a crib sheet. If you don't want to learn anything else or you don't want to read all that stuff, just go see a Shakespeare play, or 37 of them, or however many they're counting now. 36 in the first folio, and a couple have been added debatably. But anyway, so Wildings. Will is the sort of the head and the heart or head and the gut. Your will comes from your gut, kind of, intention. I am willing. And willing is an interesting word because it's both an opening and a kind of force to be reckoned with. It's both. And I believe they kind of meet in the heart. Sort of like the vagus nerve that I was talking about in the first episode this year, because it's a nerve that goes from the back of the neck, kind of ear, to down. It regulates so many bodily functions. And so the way to activate your vagus nerve, one of the ways is to make a sound, the O that begins, for a muse of fire. There you're willing a muse to come and fire you up with inspiration, right? So you've already activated the vagus nerve by saying the O, and we breathe every time at the beginning of this little episode, these little episodes, and we crush and sniff, because that's the wild part, the wildings. I don't know how to reconcile those two, but C.S. Lewis and his group of writers were called the Inklings because they wrote in ink, and that's so cute. And there's little, although I don't know if they meant it to be cute. But anyway, so I have been saying to crush and sniff with mint or rosemary, marjoram. I talked about the scientific studies of how it helps hypertension, blood pressure, obesity. Marjoram has a very flowery smell. And mint, I found this gorgeous, very big-leafed mint at Whole Foods the other day. And mint is a very soothing, so you'd want to release the essential oils. And as long as you're breathing anyway, you might as well breathe in. And I was reading all of these scientific studies this week about, frankly, I was right all along, about what it does to your bodily system. It's not just, that smells nice. It actually helps your system function in your brain, as rosemary especially. I got a lot of brain work to do today, so I'm going to crush up the rosemary. Rosemary is a great overwintering, but I was using also fennel this week, and orange. Orange has a lot. So we'll do another episode on what these scents, how smelling these scents, the effect that it has on the body. But I'm very thrilled to be bringing on a woman today that I met at the Women in the World conference several years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, who normally we talk about with Hannah Sylvester, the medical herbalist, about how to heal the body. But January, and this is the last day in January, it's been a year already, right? It's been a year so far. It's been quite the year. And we are going to be talking about this book. And I totally forgot that our book has this thing to help you find. Broom. because we call things things, have names for stuff, and often we don't know where they come from. So the first person I'm going to bring on here is a friend of mine that I gave one of these wonderful brooms to, that I bought at the Women in the World conference from this woman, Cynthia Main, that I'm going to bring on, who makes brooms out of broom. And it's just, they're so beautiful. They're works of art. Okay, so there we go. So I just waved at the woman that I want to bring on, and how do I actually bring her on? There, let's see. I think this should work. Broom, because I didn't have time to go over there. She lives not far from where I am in Washington, D.C., and I just did a little invitation. Cynthia, there she is. It's snowing here, which is a great cleansing thing, and there she is in her hat. Hello, Marty.
Hello.
Look at that beautiful. You can already see the beautiful staff or stick or whatever. So show us the whole thing.
Okay, this is where the broom lives on the porch. So I'm going to
Okay.
show you. It's a tongue broom.
Look at that. Isn't that just stunning? It divides into two pieces, and you actually think you could fly on it if you wanted to.
Very good for tops of doors and things like that.
All right. Great.
Up as well as down. I love this.
Oh.
I love this broom.
I'm so glad. Thank you for showing it to us. I so appreciate it. And now we're going to talk to the maker of the broom. See you soon. Okay, now I see Cynthia, and we're going to bring her on. Let's see. How did I do that? I just did that. Okay, there we go. Oh, I'm learning so many things after doing this for, 7 months now. So she brooms, there's a line. I didn't do the line of the hello.
Hi, you did it.
Proud.
I know, that's how I feel. Every time I successfully do something with technology, I'm like, I did it.
Well, I mean, I'm a writer, and we have to learn this stuff, but oh my God. Okay. First of all, Cynthia Main of Sunhouse Crafts, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And she, who has the widest smile I've ever seen.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I can thank my parents for that. They have big mouths.
Are you holding the broom? Are you holding the broom?
So I brought a few things. One is, one thing that was really interesting that I learned, I had the opportunity to teach a basket weaver in Scotland. One thing I thought you might find particularly interesting is the broom making tradition, with the exception of there's a traditional made out of birch bark where you actually split the wood into lots of pieces. So it's like a frayed piece of wood that they make into a broom.
Interesting.
But they've essentially lost their broom making traditions over there. Yeah, it's really interesting in a lot of places. And if you kind of track from the 1960s, even back and forth to Europe with green woodworking, which I'm also kind of a part of that community, which gets into that traditional sort of thing that you're excited about.
I'm back when we do the tree stuff. I'm totally
great.
back.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth that happened where things would almost get lost in Europe. And then someone in America would get curious and kind of bring it back up. And then it would go back to Europe and flourish there. And then people would go to Europe to learn. So there's this kind of like tiny remaining legacies of things. But something very interesting happened, which was a Scottish basket maker reached out to see if I could teach him the basics. And they had the plant that you call broom. And so what I've learned is what we call broom corn, which is what we make it out of. It's this plant, and then it weaves into something like this. You de-seed it, and it weaves into this. It's actually different because apparently the English used to call everything that had a seed head corn.
Yes.
So yeah, you would know. So this broom is actually different from that broom, and I did not know that. So he showed me some of the traditional broom And the tradition to make them was lost. Like he didn't know anybody who could help him or show him or teach him. So I taught him how over Instagram, over the internet, like here's
Really?
how, here's like our traditional forms that are from your traditional forms, you know, using the more traditional material that grows there in the wild. So it grows wild in Scotland. It's actually kind of, I won't say invasive, but you know, maybe borderline for that. So that was kind of, brooms and barley are awesome, somebody says. They're so awesome. I agree. There's this big thing, actually. Well, I could totally digress into how people sweep in different cultures and what the materials are and how that affects. I'm like, where do you want to go? Because I could talk about this stuff for a long time.
Works together and teaching people how to make brooms out of broom, but then, you know, COVID happened and all that stuff. So you've been doing amazing workshops on your Instagram lives. I mean, are people actually, where are they getting the stuff to make them with?
They are. So it's an interesting, so that is one of my like big passions is sourcing. The entire broom growing industry, and I live in Kentucky, has pretty much left this country because it's still a machete harvest. Though I've been thinking a lot about this. So I used to be a sorghum farmer. This is a sorghum, actually. And so we would grow it. I think we're going to test pilot some automated harvest this year using a sickle bar mower, which is kind of a classic mower. You can power it behind a horse. It's not, and by powered by the horse, I mean it's powered by the actual motion of the thing itself. So it's automated, but it's not like heavily automated.
I just say Shakespeare talks a lot about the side, usually having to do with time and aging and all of that stuff. But
interesting.
And also, you know, I forgot to say the line of the week, but there are 3 lines for broom, and because I wanted you to come on in January because January is such a clearing out and decluttering and all that idea.
Yeah.
And so Iris says it in The Tempest. It's in Two Noble Kinsmen, but the one I love is from Puck. I am sent with broom before to sweep the dust behind the door. So we're sweeping the dust in front of the door to find out how this is done. And I actually want to know how on earth you got into this in the first place, broom making and all of this stuff.
Sure. So I worked running a teaching woodshop in Chicago for formerly incarcerated folks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was it was like one of those strange dream jobs that you're like, I'm not qualified, but somehow you end up doing it.
But how did you teach wood? What did you say? Wood carving?
Woodworking. Yeah. I've been making things my entire adult life. I don't know. I mean, it's like some people, you know, become whatever their entire life. I mean, you know.
So you picked up a piece of wood one day and started what? I mean, how did this?
I don't know. I mean, it's like some people bake, you know. Originally, I took a few classes. I'm a college dropout. I took a few classes in to be a shop teacher at NC State, so technical education. And I think that was enough that somebody was willing to hire me as a carpenter. You know, because at the time it was very rare to see a woman carpenter. I mean, it was, you know, people were just like, oh, that's weird, you know. And having that job was enough of an inroad. And then I built my first house, I think when I was 19, just like remodeled an old place. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, I don't know. I was just geared that way. I mean, my mom thought I was a maniac as a child because I would buy tools in secret. You know, it was just like, I don't know, you know, it's the thing.
Is of what attracts certain people. That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. You taught incarcerated people woodworking.
Right. So that's like 10, 15 years into making things. You know, I'd worked for a metal fabricator at that point. I'd worked as a set builder. I'd worked as a farmer. You know, I've always been kind of curious about how to make things. And then we were working there and we did some jobs where we would refurbish bars and things like that. It was kind of a thing then. And someone asked if we could make barrels, And the barrels are made through coopering, which is the traditional techniques. And I was just like really intrigued. I
Okay,
had
a lot
no
of Carol in Shakespeare, and also the last name Cooper is from people who did this.
right. So I became obsessed, and there were only about 3 places in the country that taught coopering, and one of them was this place called Tillers International that was a traditional rural skills school. They do a lot of work kind of, yeah, teaching traditional techniques in countries that don't have a lot of access, or like where people, are still wanting to harvest their crops, in traditional ways. And also there's I think a little bit of a resurgence of that in the United States. So I went there, I quit my job, and I became an apprentice there for a year, and I learned how to, shock wheat and drive horses and harvest grain with, oxen and that sort of thing. And I had already farmed for quite a number of years by that point. So it was kind of like trying to bring back some of the things I loved into my life and bring that into balance. And one of the coopering.
January is a good time to find, these stories I find so inspiring because there's so many paths to your passion.
Yeah.
And apprentice, you brought up the whole apprenticing thing. Again, in Shakespeare, that's how many people found their professions, if not passions, especially printers and stationers and all that. They didn't go to Cambridge and Oxford, which were the only universities at the time. They went and apprenticed with somebody for 10 years, and then they had to not have a non-compete clause in a way, and they could still work. But then a lot of times the guys, and this was mostly men, let's face it, married the boss's daughter and took over the printing business. But apprenticeship, I think, is something that we have lost, and I think it's so important to bring that back as well. But anyway, please continue.
No, it's so interesting how much these crafts and things to learn still lean towards that sort of education. Like, I've had so many amazing people that I've worked for over the years who are just like strong and smart and skilled, and just like year after year learning. And then I was realizing, so I'll get back to that story and then I'll say more about that. But they're one of the coopering instructors, and I did go really deep into coopering and ended up having a backyard cooperage after that, which was really great. He was also a broom maker professionally, and a production broom maker at that, like someone who makes thousands of brooms, big production oriented broom maker. And I took his class, and he was like, you could do this for a living. Like no question. It was just like the perfect mix of precise and loose. And I immediately I loved it. So now I am a production broom maker.
Circuitous route for finding your passion. I mean, all these things, like I always say, like plots on a map, and they look like a scatter graph, and then one day it all makes sense.
Yes,
and
yes.
Keep going, and one day it's going to form a picture that makes sense to you. So you make so many gorgeous things, and I bought the one that I had Marty show, the sort of double broom.
Oh, it's so great to see.
And, I have another friend who's mounted it on her wall because she finds it so beautiful. But the Duke of Burgundy and Henry V talks about beauty and utility. And this is what I love about what you make, because it is beauty and utility. You can actually use them. And you started making them with like colored, what is that stuff called that binds them together?
Yeah, thread or twine. I use a lot of hemp these days. Which is also a little bit of an advanced weaving technique. It's again a product or a crop that has been lost, and so what we're using now doesn't have that same. It's not as strong. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. So it's not. Well, I shouldn't say it's not as strong. I should say the things I use aren't made for what I use them for. So it takes a lot of practice to get it to work. Yeah.
Do you have other brooms that you can show us? I also have what's the thing that you push the broom stuff into?
A dustpan.
The other day. Anyway, and it's made of leather, sort of molded leather. It's so beautiful. And obviously it's so great to not have more plastic in the world, you know?
Yeah.
So, do you have any you can show us
I
of
do.
these?
Yeah, I do. So this is the dustpan of which you speak. Um, this
Which
was
one?
this was the same sort of following the obsession, and working with people I love. I have a very good friend named Casey Gunshall, who, if you want to talk to an amazing leather worker, um, she kind of talked me through, again, you'll love this, some lost techniques. Um, so leather, depending on the heat of the water that you put it into, will come out hard. Like, they used to use it as armor. I don't know if there's any record of this in your reading, possibly.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
And jerkins. They made all these jerkins out of leather, and they cut them so the fabric could come through. And a lot of these paintings, people see, they don't realize that that's leather that they're wearing.
no, it is a fascinating material, and you can make it so hard and brittle, it's like a potato chip. So if you dip a small scrap of leather in boiling water and then take it out, it gets that thickness and that lack of resistance that is just totally shocking. So I had an idea. I was like, I want to figure this out. And Casey, who's just like also a master of archaic weirdness, was like, oh, try these techniques and go research this. And I was like, okay. So it was trial and error to kind of figure out how to get something that I wanted that could hold shape and form. Yeah, that's how I made this.
Sweep the broom into the dustpan, even though Puck says, he sweeps the dust behind the door. But let's see the brooms.
Okay, yeah, I should go grab, I have some interesting ones. I actually came into the shop to work on some Valentine's Day double brooms, and some other sculptural stuff.
Great and unusual gift is to give somebody a double broom. That's so sweet.
Yeah, I was pretty excited about it. I was like, oh, okay. I do so much production that sometimes I forget to just play with the form again.
Yeah.
But these are also interesting, speaking of archaic techniques. So I natural dye the bristles, and, it's a process where you scour it, you use a mordant, you use a dye, and using the natural plant dyes to actually change the color of what's called a closed cell fiber, so like cotton, or any of those things to achieve a color. That's also been a very interesting road, because it's actually fairly challenging to get a strong dark closed cell dye on a broom. And for whatever reason, I was like, of course I want black. It's like, as challenging as red, or some of those things that are really hard to achieve. I'm curious, does Shakespeare talk about natural dyes or dyes a lot?
Anyway, we did do not a workshop, but I had this wonderful woman on, Jennifer Ratcliffe, who does dyeing fabrics from antique practices.
Oh,
You use
cool.
to get these different colors of mustard and yellows and golds, and we were thinking about having a workshop on it, but it's kind of a two-step thing, so I couldn't figure out how to do it in a one go. But we will do that. But yeah, that, and also one of the reasons I do this is because, people have said that line, Puck's line, I was sent with broom before. It's the line of the week, folks. Because what I'm trying to do here is blend the intellectual, or what is considered the intellectual, with the physical, because there is, we separate these things, and they shouldn't be separated. It's like a holistic. So when Puck is talking about the broom, or when you're saying on the line, then then you reference how to make these brooms, and these brooms were made from brooms, and, and all of that kind of stuff. So, all of that stuff is referenced in an oblique way, in the way that it's a normal part of your life, and you don't highlight it because it's normal. You just say it in a offhand way, but because it's not normal for us, we often don't understand what he's talking about.
It's so, yeah, I appreciate that so much, because I think I don't know, I'd love for these things to be more normal in people's lives, more of a body understanding and a commonplace understanding. And I think it just points to what you're saying, which there's so many different ways. And one of the things I appreciate about your work is there's so many different ways to understand, and there's so many different ways to know. And I think talking to craftspeople and makers, it is a different kind of understanding. Like, that is my first language. I spent thousands of hours last year in the broom shop,
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, that's how I, you know, more than talking for sure.
Well, certainly this last year has changed, you know, how we all, I mean, have you been more productive with the brooms and all the stuff that you make since this has happened? And why is that? Because you're not traveling, or?
I think, well, my business, because before, I was farming and working at a cabinet shop and making brooms. So I was kind of in this triangle where it wasn't full time. And in the last 2 years or so, I've really been able to focus. The city I live in is the craft capital of Kentucky, and
Oh,
it's called Berea, Kentucky, and they had a program where if you were a traditional craftsperson, they would give you a studio and a stipend for a year to share and demonstrate your craft with the public. And I did that program, and it allowed me to just focus on some of these, lost techniques, basically. When I sort of really grew my business, most of the things you were saying were these extremely traditional forms. And I think now in broom making, we're kind of seeing this renaissance where people are allowing themselves to break out of the mold of tradition and use the traditional techniques and kind of, you know, bring it forward a little bit into culture. And, you know, a lot of what's made is still quite traditional, but there's also I don't know, it's more playful now. I mean, it's great. So broom making is having a renaissance, and yeah, I know. I'm like, I mean,
that's everything. Did you come up with the style of the ones that kind of go off to the side and are wrapped with the twine in the different colors?
No, that is, there are some things like using this fiber, which is an agave. This is something that I pioneered from, this was a fiber you saw a lot in brush making, in wooden brush making. And so I was curious, can you weave it? Can you not weave it? So I brought this over. But some of the styles, like this is a traditional turkey wing weave. This is it's like the classic, you know, it's like the hit.
Weave on the agave one. Can you just show that up close? Sure. You guys should go to her Instagram page because look how beautiful that is. That's
funny. This is actually the first one that I made.
So wow.
I save it to line up my spacing and things like that so I can get a handle on it. So like each thing has its own, and you'll appreciate this. This is actually, you might want to talk to him. He's a very interesting person. His name is Emmett Van Driesch. This is our version of a polissure. It's like a French wood burnishing technique before there was sandpaper or things like that. You take this on a piece of wood and you go like this, and that's what actually crushes the fibers and makes it smooth. So this is actually what I use on all the handles. There's no sanding, there's no mechanization. It's all draw knife, spoke shave, very traditional tools. They probably would have been around in Shakespeare's day or variations of them. And then this is a 14th century tool on, you know, at the end of it. So these were things that, like I said, I'm sure people were using them in broom making. I wasn't aware of it. So, you know, they're things that I kind of was like, had that year of an open shop to figure out like, how does this work? You know?
Okay. So we're two questions. Like, where do you source this stuff from? Because one of the ways that I, you know, connected with Cynthia, aside from buying the beautiful brooms, is, because I was making this Queen Elizabeth and her ruff made out of rough grains. And I was having a very hard time finding white wheat and barley I never found, but I used barley pearls because pearls were the favorite jewel of Queen Elizabeth. So it was this beautiful metaphor to use the barley pearls and rye and wheat, oats, and rye. And so I didn't know where to find them, and you were trying to help me with that.
Yeah, no, I actually, at the time when we met, I was still farming in Missouri, and somebody had reached out from the Missouri traditional, they were like traditional seed saving the grains. They had the grain library from Missouri, and they were basically like, can you take this from me? And I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm not prepared. But I think there is a movement, and there are a lot of people who are saving, saving seeds from these traditional grains and essentially looking for them. Seed savers, different seed libraries, seed banks are good places to look for these things. This is stuff that,
so I need it already grown.
That's going to be hard to find. So if we're actually processing our 1/4 acre, and then we're partnering with more farmers this year to grow ours. Because in general, if you're not growing your own, this crop has moved to Mexico, mostly because people are still willing to do machete work for crops. So it is, which I love group crop work personally. I think it's really fun. We could
size. I would much rather go to a, macheteing a wheat field than go to a gym or go.
Oh, totally. So I heard, it's funny, I heard you talking a little bit about like soothing the nervous system earlier, and like, there's a little bit of talk about mirror neurons, that we're like made to mirror each other's emotions. And part of me during this whole lockdown, I'm like, what's happening to everyone's mirror neurons? They're atrophying for sure. But long story short, it's how I think just, it's like, it feels so normal to do group farming work, to be out there with a group of, call it 10, 15 people in a field macheting down a crop. I love it. It's like some of my favorite. I did it for 4 years, and it's one of my like highlights of the year was processing the crops.
Well, I'd love to put together a Shakespeare and natural products like retreat or something. Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing. The amount of knowledge you have, I just like hope people appreciate. Yeah, some of these things, like I said, they're not lost, but they're almost lost, And like, I'm so deep in that crowd, I think it's like, there's a big wave and like a huge upsurgence, and it's like, it's probably me and like 100, it's probably like you and Shakespeare, enthusiasts. It's like, I'm in that crowd so much. I just, I think there's this huge upsurgence in like restorative farming and traditional crafts and things like that. And maybe there is. I hope there is. Let's just go with there is.
I talked to this woman who started a medlar orchard in England, and I said, "You have the year of the medlar," because most people don't know what it is even. And one of the reasons we did the book is so that, actors and other people could understand the lines, and because a lot of times you take stuff for granted, and I think that just household tools you take for granted too, and everything that goes into them. And, we have this also idea that something that was old-fashioned or made a certain way isn't as effective. I should have asked Marty that. And it's just not true, right?
That was the main thing that won me over is I hate to say it, sorry, plastic broom makers out there watching this, it's superior. It is such a pleasant experience to use a handmade broom, mostly because the ends are looser and they pick up easier. It's not as jarring to the body. These sound like subtle things, but they're important, and it makes the chore more of a revelation of how people used to get so much done. It's like, well, how did they sweep this whole thing? It's like, oh, they had something that could reach the top corner and they could just dust it off real quick and it was good. As the tools kind of disappear, so the techniques are lost. It's like, whether we're reinventing or bringing things back, I think we have to be, considering that, like, well, how do we do that?
Oh my God, this is just fascinating. We usually try to keep these shows to 20 minutes, but I stuff like this gives me tingles. So I hope.
I can tell I've been quarantined. I'm like so excited to talk about, and to be honest, I mostly make things. I don't talk about my craft, but it's like I read everything there is to read. I'm super enthusiastic. I love the traditional techniques, and like I get really excited about traditional crafts.
I understand, and I get excited obviously about Shakespeare, but also trying to widen people's perceptions of what it is and what it does does and all of the stuff that's in it. So I hope we'll bring you back when we're doing the Urban Tree Festival again in May.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Would love to bring you back to talk about the wood aspects.
I would love that.
Talk about the birch twigs, birches in Shakespeare. She has an amazing walnut tool that I won't talk about now, but walnut obviously is in Shakespeare as well.
We could talk about, I love eating and processing black walnut. Like, I'm just like, that is a neglected American crop right there. There's so many uses for it across the board, but I mean, English walnuts, American walnuts, we'll get into that at some point.
our Shakespeare and craft retreat.
I think that would just be a delight. Everyone would want to go.
Thank you so much for coming on. Guys, remember the line of the week. I am sent with broom before to sweep the desk behind the door. Actually, you're decluttering in January. And next week, we're going to be talking about magical spells with thorns in preparation for Valentine's Day. Check out Cynthia's Sunhouse Crafts for the beautiful, beautiful brooms and everything else. And I hate to say it, but this is also a pretty good Valentine gift. We call it the bouquet that never withers.
Oh, so for sure. If you haven't checked out her writing, please do. And thank you. This was a delight.
Thank you so much. See you guys.
Bye.